morning sun shines on the gleaming hide of a muscular ranch horse. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifts from the wood cook stove at a cow camp. Silver spurs jingle as the men and women of the West get set for another day in the saddle. From the heart of Canada's finest ranching country, this is the Spirit of the West with rancher and horse trainer Hugh McLennan and his collection of music, poetry, and conversations with the folks who live and work with horses and cattle in the Spirit of the West.
I'm not sure how many cows or steers or heifers he's actually caught in his loop, but my guest this week is pretty handy with a rope. He's famous trick roper Bud Edgar, and he really knows cowboy traditions and culture, right?
He said, how'd you know that? I said, I know a thing or two about a thing or two, right?
Now, this guy has performed his trick roping magic all over the country, and I've got a feeling we're going to have a lot of fun today. This week's guest is kind of shy, but he did agree to sit in for the visit. Bud Edgar, world-famous team roper, cowboy, poet, clown, and everything else. So good to see you. How's it going?
Not so bad. I'm not a team roper, but I'm a trick roper.
Did I say team roper?
You said
Oh, I meant to say
okay.
trick roper. Yeah.
That's okay. That's a common mistake made. I have a lot of fun with that, to be honest with you, because these young kids come up that are team ropers, and they look at my cotton rope and they can't figure it out now. But
What's the most difficult trick you've had to master?
Well,
Just describe kind of what it is and what you do.
you know, the coolest thing is I got to meet the famous Monty Montana.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I got to meet him. I went to a convention at the Will Rogers Ranch, and he was there. And beautiful ranch. Anyway, his joke was, everybody says there's a Texas skip, as you know, which was, by the way, invented by Flores Ledoux, who was Guy Weedick's wife.
Right.
Which is a really cool story. And she invented, it's in the Oklahoma Cowgirl Hall of Fame about her doing that. She didn't get any credit because she was a woman, and you know,
back in
those days. But his joke was, the Texas skip is not the hardest trick to do. It is really, but his joke, he made it into a joke. The hardest trick is to get somebody to hire you to do this.
Yeah, right.
He was a great roper. Yeah.
Who was Will Rogers, like the father of modern trick ropers? I mean, he started. Most people have probably listened to our show, know his life story, maybe have seen the movies or read the book or his biography and that kind of thing. Was he kind of the father of modern trick ropers?
He made it popular in the States, but he saw Vincetti Orpezio, I hope I'm saying that right, was in the Wild West show in like 1882 that Buffalo Bill brought him in as a Mexican charro. And he was a trick roper with a Maguey rope. He could write his name, every letter of his name, I don't know how, with a rope. And Will was a little kid, and Will was roping on the farm, and he saw this guy, and they claimed that was his inspiration to trick rope. And of course he became one of the most famous of the trick ropers, and later became the great vaudeville star he was, and author, and good thing he didn't have a radio show. He'd be like you. He's famous.
Yeah. I mean, his quotations are everywhere, and I've often said to Baxter Black that he's kind of like the modern day Will Rogers. Baxter denies that. He wants no part of that. Wow. But there is especially once Will became a newspaper columnist and kind of a spokesman for the common man, and deflated a lot of stuffed shirts, and was one of the most listened to commentators in America. Baxter Black has that same kind of I think that has that same spin on the way the world works. So.
Yeah, he's a beautiful artist, but I think Baxter's got the right idea. Like, you know, my daughter, because my wife and I are both clowns, and we were at a gig one time with her, dressed up as a clown, and they interviewed her, and she blew me away. And I used this line. She said, "Do you want to be a clown like your mom and dad?" She said, "No, I want to be a clown like me." Right? Yeah. And I don't want to be Monty. I'd love to be Monty Montana, but I'm not. I'd love to be Vince Bruce or Thomas Garcinero. But I'm just a comedy guy who does a little spinning, and I have some fun with it.
Okay, well, I want you to think about some of your childhood heroes, Bud, and we'll talk about some of them when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. He's colorful, knowledgeable, and boy, is he entertaining. The famous trick roper Bud Edgar is my guest this week. Okay, now, when you were growing up, who were some of your heroes? Like, television didn't come along until I was, getting up there in years already. 1954, I think, was first black and white TV set my folks had, and they were, fairly early to get it. But when you were growing up, who were some of your heroes?
Well, definitely Roy Rogers. I never saw Gene Autry as a kid other than in a movie, and I don't remember that. But I remember the Roy Rogers show. He had a very big influence on me. The Lone Ranger later, and all the cowboys, because we lived on the farm as a kid. And when I moved into town, I still miss that farm, and I love that stuff. And when later in life, when I worked in Dubai at a grand opening of a theme park. Yeah, it was a financial pleasure.
Yeah.
It was, my friend. So I had all this money when I come home, and I said, "Are you going to take my daughter and wife to Disneyland?" My daughter was like 10 or less, and so we went to Disneyland. And while we were there, we went to Victorville to the original museum, the original one.
Yeah.
And then years later, they moved it to Branson, as you know, and then they finally closed it.
Yeah. They had the big auction, and RFD Television bought Trigger, and I think they bought Buttermilk and Bullet, and the rest of, Roy's famous saddle and all of the other stuff, his car, were all auctioned off to pay U.S. estate taxes.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, he had a very unique collection of stuff. And I also saw the nudie car that Bill Heron owned in Calgary that Roy rode in the parade. I was in the Cochrane parade, and this guy drives by. I said, "That's Bill Heron's car." He said, "How'd you know that?" I said, "I know a thing or two about a thing or two, right?" And I got a really cool picture of me spinning a big loop by the nudie car.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
And this is Nudie the tailor.
Nudie the tailor. He built for Bill Heron a big Allman. He had two different cars. And when Roy and Dale came to the Stampede, he lent him a car. Actually, Bill Heron is credited with the original guy who wore the white hat. And Don McKay took it from there and made it the traditional cow.
Yeah. Best nudie suits I ever saw were Rex Allen, last of the Silver String Cowboys at the, those suits that he wore.
Oh, yeah, they're beautiful. I really like Rex, and I'm a friend with Rex Allen Jr. on Facebook.
Really, Chico. Yeah.
He's a great guy. I didn't know Chico, but he's a great actor.
Yes, Bud Edgar.
So where did you grow up, Bud?
I haven't yet, but I'm working.
Good answer.
My dad was
Where did you not grow up?
My dad was a cowboy, and he was a head herdsman for the Patrick Burns family at Fish Creek Park.
Really?
Really, came a museum. My dad was given a brand by the Burns family that goes back to 1882. Lord Latham was given it to it by Queen Victoria, and Burns absorbed all those. And either my dad got it or stole it. No, it's a good story either way, I always say, but he owned that brand. And my mom and dad split up. I moved into town as a kid, so you can take the boy out of the country, they say. So, but it was all good. And my dad got to be very proud of me for being the entertainer. And I don't know, he wasn't around much to see much of my trick roping, but he passed at 90, though. That was a good life for him.
How old were you when you first started trick roping?
I have to do math. And there's only three kinds of people in the world, isn't there? Those that are good at math and those that ain't.
Those three. Yeah.
Those three. But I don't know. I got really serious about it 7 years ago because somebody asked if I could perform without my makeup as a trick roper instead of a clown, and my wife as well, because she trick ropes a bit. And I said, good idea. So 7 years ago, I did my first comedy cowboy, I call it, gig.
Now, I've done a few shows with trick ropers. I don't know if you remember Sky Floyd Drew or not. Sky used to do rope tricks. And one time I was entertaining with him in an old folks' home, and we thought, I'll do some cowboy songs and some poems, and Sky will do a couple of songs, and then he'll do some rope tricks. And we should have taken into consideration that there's a very low ceiling in that room and a big ceiling fan. Right about he didn't see that. That didn't go well. Anything like that ever, in all the gigs you've done, performances you've done, there must have been a few moments where you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be a wreck. I've been in situations. I did the Ivan Danes picnic. It was a height restriction, but when I got to Texas Skip at the end, I got down on the floor and I had more height. And I have nightmares about things like that. Like I just get out on stage and somebody has taken my guitar and put it all out of tune just before I start. So was that you? No, but that's a dirty, rotten trick. But, you always got to worry about those kind of things, but you got to be flexible on your feet. And, I have a fiddle act, and it's basically, I think you saw it years ago at Kamloops. It's a plunger made out of a into a fiddle, and I play it with a rubber chicken. So years ago, I do this. I said to Larry Warner at Camrose, I said, you got a fiddle contest, just as a joke. I don't have to be a clown, but let me go in and play my plunger. So the beauty is I'm backstage, and I don't open my case, and all these guys are worried about me because they're all tuning up. Why is this guy not tuning up? Is he that good? It really freaks it freaks them out. You understand? But the whole joke was back to what you're saying, is when the announcer gets up, he says, I'd like to introduce Bud Edgar here. He's going to play his plunger with a rubber chicken. Boom. No surprise. No.
Kind of took the element of surprise out of it, though, for sure. The always entertaining Bud Edgar is my guest today, and we've been talking about some of our cowboy heroes, Roy Rogers, the Lone Ranger, Rex Allen, and we can't leave out Gene Autry.
Yeah, I saw Gene Autry in Champion at the same place.
Oh, man.
Twice, 2 different years. And I'm not sure if Champion was the same horse each time. It might have been because there was actually 7 champions. But Gene rode right up a ramp up onto the stage on Champ, and then somebody took him back down, and he did a bunch of songs, and then he rode them all up and down the aisle. First year, his sidekick was Pat Buttram.
Yep.
It was very funny. And the second year, it was the unbelievable Smiley Burnett.
Oh, wow.
He stole the show.
That's awesome. Well, you know, what a neat thing for you to have done. I didn't know a lot about Gene because we just didn't have him and when I was a kid, but I saw Roy on TV because my dad was working at that time selling farm machinery, and they brought in TV sets. The Commercial Tire, they had one in the window, and people would stand out all night long.
Remember that?
Yeah.
You didn't have a TV at home, but these stores, appliance stores, would put one up and turn it on in their window.
And we watched the test pattern until 4 or 5 o'clock.
Oh, that was,
yeah, it never changed, but it was neat.
Gosh. But Roy was Roy and Dale, wonderful role models, and we never saw him in person until the Sons of the Pioneers 75th anniversary, I think, in Tucson. Mm-hmm. And Roy was up in his 80s at that time. And he still sang with the Pioneers. They did Texas Plains. He yodeled, and it was pretty awesome. It was maybe a year and a half or 2 years after that he rode across the Great Divide.
And Bud, I know that you've written a poem about the King of the Cowboys, and I'd like to have you recite it in the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight coming up. Well, it sure has been fun visiting with the one and only Bud Edgar this week. And Bud,
you have done a poem about Roy.
I was inspired, really, when they closed the museum to write a little poem, and I'll rip it off here if I can remember it. I hope I can. Go something like this. I was a cowboy when Roy Rogers was on TV. When he was riding Trigger, I was riding on my daddy's knee. You know, it only took us a half an hour to round up the bad guys, and we still had time left to sing Happy Trails under western skies. Sure, he had other sidekicks like Gabby Hayes and Pat Brady, and he had Bullet the Wonder Dog, and Dale Evans was his lady. But you know, Roy gave us those rider rules so we'd grow up right. And he even had bed sheets we could dream on at night. But you know, they've closed down the museum, and Roy and Trigger rode away, but he called me Little Wrangler. So that's what I'm going to be until my dying day.
Oh, Bud, thank you. That's great.
You know, I want to say that the coolest compliment I got one time is Ward Willard, the old chuck wagon driver, passed away just recently, unfortunately. Great guy, though. He sees me at Blake Willard. I did a lot of work for Blake, and he sees me and said, "You look like Roy Rogers." And I said, just because I wear Tom Mix pants in the style of Monty Montana and Rex Roper and J.W. Stoker, I pay tribute to them. And I said, that's an honor, man. What an honor to hear that, you know. But I'm not sure I have as many shirts. My wife counted them the other day and gave me heck. But Roy had a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Bud, thank you so much for doing this. And boy, I hope our trails cross again somewhere real soon.
Well, you bet. This is awesome. I very much appreciate this. So I'll write you a check, or you take cash.
Visa will work. Just see my agent's right here. She'll deal with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making the ride this week. And we've got more great stories, great music, and much more right here next week at the same time. Sure hope you can join us then.